We're heading to a place every dreamer of history has imagined visiting, the heart of ancient valor itself, Sparta. A land where weakness was a sin and discipline shaped legends. Today, we'll carve the strength of a warrior into our minds, march under the command of King Leonidas, and uncover what truly happened with the 300 Spartans who defied the Persian Empire. Of course, reality wasn't quite the grand spectacle you've seen in movies or games. Yet, that's exactly why this channel exists, to reveal what history actually looked like. Not what fiction made it to be. So tell me, would you dare to step into Sparta's harsh world? Leave your answer in the comments, because things are about to get brutal. Let's start with a bit of truth. The name Sparta itself isn't even accurate, it's a Roman adaptation. Look at any Spartan shield, and you'll see a bold letter lambda, the Greek lambda. Why? Because they never called themselves Spartans. They were Lacedaemonians, named after their city of Lacedaemon, though even seasoned historians often misplace the accent in that word. Over time, people began to call the city Sparta, and the modern name simply stuck. Now, another misconception: Sparta was never an isolated, secretive city. Far from it. It was a thriving state that lasted nearly 1,000 years, from the 11th to the 1st century before Christ. Ancient Greece was filled with city-states, and Sparta's domain lay in the southern lands of the Peloponnesian Peninsula, in a region called Laconia. And yes, that's where the term laconic speech came from. The people of Sparta weren't talkers, they were doers. Somewhere in that land, our story begins with a man named Vasilius. Don't be surprised by the name. In Greek it means king. The year is roughly 480 before Christ, and Sparta stands stronger than ever. Its power stretches across nearly the entire Peloponnesian Peninsula, a kingdom built on silence, steel, and unbreakable resolve. Not far from Sparta stood another mighty power, Athens, a city our warriors never truly loved. But Athens wasn't the real threat. To the east rose a colossal empire, the Achaemenids, or as most called them, the Persians. To them, all Greeks were the same. Their mission? Simple and terrifying: to seize every inch of Greek land. A single glance at the map was enough to see the scale of the problem. The Persians had more of everything: soldiers, gold, unity. Greece, on the other hand, was a puzzle of tiny city-states, often too proud to cooperate until danger stood at their doors. And yet, despite that chaos, the Persians would lose. Why? Because for Greeks, war was an art, but for Spartans, it was life itself. Our Vasilius was what the Spartans called a homoios, a full citizen, a man born into the warrior caste. Below them stood the perioikoi, common workers and craftsmen, free but not equals. And beneath them were the helots, bound to the earth they tilled, neither slaves nor free men, a shadow class trapped between servitude and survival. Yet Sparta's system was far more complex than that of its neighbors. Take Vasilius's family, for instance. They could command 10 helot households, each tending a piece of land. On parchment, the helots were property, required by law to give a fixed share of their harvest to their Spartan master. But here was the strange part: that share could never be raised. No matter how greedy a Spartan became, the law stood above him. So Vasilius was fortunate to be born a true Spartan citizen, one of the few who ruled rather than obeyed. For every Spartan like him, there were roughly 10 helots. And when those helots dared to rebel, their punishment was not just swift, it was absolute. Once each year, Sparta's rulers did something almost unthinkable: they declared war on their own slaves, the helots. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? A nation officially waging war against itself. But in a society built entirely around discipline and control, such brutality served a purpose: to eliminate the rebellious and keep the rest obedient through fear. Sparta wasn't just a state, it was a machine built for war. Every law, every custom, every breath its people took, all existed for one reason: to fight. When Vasilius was only 7 years old, his childhood ended. Like every Spartan boy, he was taken from his family and sent to the barracks. There, the boys were divided into groups and taught everything from combat and endurance to sports, and even reading, which was rare in those days. An older warrior always watched over them. ensuring the boys never grew soft. They went barefoot year-round and wore the same rough tunic in both winter and summer. Their diet? Something that would make most people gag: a dark stew called milos zomos, made of pork boiled in its own blood and mixed with vinegar. It was barely edible, but hunger was part of the lesson. In Sparta, simplicity was sacred, and strength was divine. Boys were even encouraged to steal food, not out of need, but to sharpen their cunning. If caught, the punishment was cruel. But if a thief managed to avoid discovery, he was praised for his skill. Now, let's confront one of the most chilling myths. You've probably heard that unfit Spartan children were thrown from cliffs. The story came from the philosopher Plutarch, who wrote centuries later that any child deemed weak by the council was cast off Mount Taygetus, and that parents had no say in the matter. But the truth was far less monstrous. The Greeks loved drama, and historians often exaggerated to make a point. In reality, the killing of infants wasn't unique to Sparta. It happened across Greece and even in Rome. And it wasn't mass murder, it was a grim practice reserved for the severely deformed, sparing them a life of pain. Those with minor defects weren't discarded, they simply belonged to a lower social class, living on the edges of Spartan society. Those born weaker in Sparta had a different name: hypomai, the lesser ones. They were tolerated, but never truly respected. Yet even they were not thrown from cliffs as legends claim. Modern archaeology has long since explored every ravine where such executions supposedly took place, and not a single human bone was ever found. Now, let's return to Vasilius. Spartan boys were allowed to wear proper clothing only after 12 years of age. Before that, they ran naked through the dusty courtyards, slept on straw mats inside cold barracks, and endured winters with nothing but endurance to warm them. Some would scatter stinging nettles under their bedding. The burning sensation tricked the body into feeling heat. Crude, painful, but effective. At 17, every young Spartan faced the ultimate trial, the rite of pain at the temple of Artemis, high in the mountains. The test was simple and merciless, a public flogging that ended only when the boy's skin broke and blood flowed. If he screamed, the blows continued, harder, faster, without mercy. This was Sparta's version of graduation. And our Vasilius, hardened by years of hunger and discipline, endured it in silence. He had proven himself a true warrior. But the ceremony was only the beginning. Now, at 17, he could finally leave the barracks and join the ranks of the Spartan army. Serving Sparta was no privilege, it was survival wrapped in duty. To understand how harsh that life truly was, we have to look at what they called payment. Luxury did not exist in this world. Even a decent meal was considered indulgence. The term Spartan diet wasn't a saying, it was reality. Each month, Vasilius received his rations: 3.5 buckets of barley, 2.5 kilograms of cheese, a single kilogram of dates, and about 5 liters of wine. When compared to what Roman legionnaires or Japanese samurai earned, the difference is almost pitiful. And yet, for Spartans, this was honor, enough to live, enough to fight, but never enough to grow soft. On top of this, Vasilius was given several metal rods, primitive currency, each weighing about 625 grams. But that's a story for another time. In their quest to eliminate luxury and inequality, Sparta's legendary lawgiver Lycurgus came up with a radical solution. He declared that hoarding silver or gold was punishable by death. Instead, he introduced crude iron bars as currency. Each bar weighed around 625 grams, heavy enough that anyone who wanted to make a large purchase had to carry entire bundles of them. The system had a hidden brilliance: it made every major transaction visible to everyone. Moving such bulky money in secret was nearly impossible. And when a deal happens in plain sight, people start asking questions. Where did all that wealth come from? For foreigners visiting Sparta, this was a shock. Their gold and silver coins suddenly became worthless, objects of suspicion rather than value. Spartans looked at such riches with a mix of fear and contempt. The new economy didn't entirely erase corruption or crime, but it changed the game. What's the point of accepting a bribe when storing the payment requires building an entire shed, one that everyone would notice? Every citizen received a modest allowance of iron bars. With that, a person could buy roughly 10 kilograms of meat, enough to survive, though not comfortably. Their lives were a constant struggle, filled with exhausting training and discipline. Yet out of that harsh routine rose warriors so formidable that one Spartan could stand against 10 men from any other land. This was the essence of Lycurgus's vision, a society where even a soldier's armor reflected simplicity, discipline, and strength. Our Vasilius was portrayed rather well in the film 300 Spartans. Like every heavily armed hoplite, he carried a round shield, a helmet, a bronze breastplate, and greaves protecting his legs. The movie, however, chose to show the Spartans bare-chested, a choice that might look dramatic, but in truth, it would have been pure madness on the battlefield. In reality, not all Spartans fought in full armor. There were also lighter infantrymen, agile warriors equipped with spears, bows, and throwing javelins. From the age of 7, every Spartan boy learned to master every weapon at his disposal. The structure of their army was unlike anything else in the ancient world. Some of their methods, like the disciplined line formation and strict hierarchy, are still mirrored in modern militaries today. Their unwavering discipline and superhuman endurance forged an army that was nearly impossible to break. The Spartan phalanx, 8 ranks deep, could stretch for almost 1 kilometer across the battlefield. And for centuries, until the 3rd century before Christ, it was believed to be an unbreakable wall of bronze and willpower. The reason was simple: Spartans didn't rely on fortifications or complex engineering. They simply pushed forward, driven by sheer strength and fearlessness. Now, back to our Vasilius. The year is 480 before Christ. The war against the unwashed Persian hordes is raging on, and Sparta is ruled by King Leonidas, himself a warrior among warriors. Everyone remembers the story from the movie 300, so we won't retell it. Instead, let's look at what truly happened. Imagine Vasilius standing among the 300 Spartan soldiers, shoulder to shoulder with Leonidas himself, who really did fight in the front lines with his men. Together, they held their ground in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a natural choke point shown earlier on our map comparing the size of the two empires. According to various sources, the Persians numbered around 250,000 men. Against them stood only about 7,000 Greek warriors. It's worth noting that the number of Spartans at Thermopylae was not random. Those 300 warriors were the king's personal guard, the finest soldiers Sparta could offer. And for 2 long days, they held back an enemy that outnumbered them 20 to 1. Could they have lasted longer? Perhaps. But fate had other plans. A local man named Ephialtes, driven by greed, betrayed his own people. He revealed to the Persians a hidden mountain path that would allow them to circle around and strike the Greeks from behind. Yet Spartan scouts were always vigilant. King Leonidas learned of the treachery before it was too late. Realizing the situation was hopeless, he made a decision worthy of legend. Leonidas ordered the bulk of the army to retreat and remain alive to fight another day. He, however, stayed behind, with only his 300 hoplites. It wasn't an act of reckless heroism or blind pride. It was reason and duty. In Sparta, there was no greater disgrace than retreating from battle without a direct command. But Leonidas was the one who gave such commands. So if he fled, who would there be to order him to stay? He chose to remain, accepting a death that would echo through eternity. And Vasilius, our imagined Spartan among them, stood his ground as well, shoulder to shoulder with his king. The film 300 left out an important truth: Leonidas and his Spartans weren't alone. Several other Greek allies stayed willingly to share their fate, about 700 men from Thespiae and another 400 from Thebes. And let's not forget the helots, the enslaved men who served Sparta. They weren't mere servants. In campaigns, they often fought as light infantry. No one knows exactly how many of them were there, but their presence is undeniable. So, in reality, the defenders numbered closer to 1,500. Still, that changes nothing. Their stand remains one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in human history. During those 3 days of relentless fighting, they killed around 5,000 Persians, among them, the elite warriors known as the Immortals. By the time the dust settled, roughly 4,000 Greeks had fallen, but Persian losses were more than 5 times higher. And behind those numbers lies something deeper, the unshakable spirit of men who knew they were doomed, yet chose to fight anyway. In time, Greece would rise victorious. The Persians were pushed back, and a peace treaty, surprisingly favorable to the Greeks, marked the end of the war. So, don't mourn our Vasili. As you've probably realized by now, his life was anything but easy. Yet for a Spartan, to fall in battle was not tragedy, it was the highest form of honor. Take, for example, one of the original 300 warriors, Aristodemus. During the Battle of Thermopylae, he fell ill, and King Leonidas ordered him to retreat to recover. When the king and his men perished, Aristodemus returned to Sparta alive, but not celebrated. They called him Aristodemus the Coward. Even later, when he redeemed himself in battle, his name remained tainted. In Sparta, surviving when others died was a burden heavier than armor. A year later, in 479 before our era, another Spartan, Pausanias, led the united Greek forces into the final confrontation with Persia near the town of Plataea. The outcome? A crushing victory for the Greeks. Despite being outnumbered 3-1, they annihilated the enemy and finally ended the invasion. Aristodemus fought in that battle too. He fought bravely, heroically, even, but no amount of bloodshed could wash away his earlier shame. In the eyes of his people, his fate was sealed the moment he survived when others did not. Now, before we close this chapter, here's something you might not expect. If Spartan boys were trained to master the art of war from childhood, Spartan girls were trained for something equally important, the art of life. Their purpose was to give birth to strong, healthy warriors, and to do that, they themselves had to be strong. They learned to read, to write, to run, to fight. In a sense, Sparta could be seen as one of the earliest examples of female empowerment. Imagine that, more than 2,000 years ago, Spartan women could wield a spear with confidence, while even 100 years ago, women in some countries still couldn't vote. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how relative progress truly is. And so, harsh as their lives may have been, the Spartans carved their name into the stone of history, forever. That's where our journey ends for now. But if you enjoyed stepping into the sandals of a Spartan warrior, don't forget to show your support, and tell us in the comments which ancient warrior you'd like to see next. Until next time, my friends.